You can't just take it back. That's what my wife said. Standing in the kitchen of our apartment in Portland, wearing the clothes she'd slept in, not looking at me. It was a Tuesday morning in March. 8 months after we'd signed the papers on the Cannon Beach house. The one we'd bought as an investment, yes, but also specifically as a gift for her parents' 50th anniversary. I remember the smell of cold coffee and the sound of rain on the windows behind her. I remember my hands shaking as I held my phone, which contained 17 screenshots of Airbnb listings with photos of our house. Professional photos. Staged with throw pillows we'd never bought. They've turned it into a business, I said quietly. They've turned it into their retirement plan, she corrected. That distinction mattered. It meant she already knew. And knowing changed everything. The whole thing started because I wanted to be the hero. Not in a conscious way. But there's a version of me that was tired of being the person who showed up to family dinners slightly wrong. The son-in-law who worked in tech, who didn't understand their small business, who didn't have the kinds of roots they respected. My wife's parents had spent 47 years in Cannon Beach, Oregon. They owned a boat repair shop. They knew everyone. They belonged there in a way I was still learning how to want. When my wife mentioned they'd talked about downsizing, something clicked. What if we bought them a place? I said one evening, probably 5 drinks in. Like directly. A property they could actually own, use. Somewhere for family gatherings. My wife looked skeptical. My in-laws, when we brought it up weeks later, looked stunned. In a good way. Or what felt like a good way. We couldn't ask you to do that, her father said. But they wanted it. That was clear. They wanted it badly. We found the house in February. 3 bedrooms, ocean view. Built in the 1970s with good bones. Needed some updating but nothing structural. We paid cash, a significant amount money we'd been saving for exactly this type of thing, though not quite this. The deed went in their names. It was theirs. The pattern started small. Dad wants to know if you'd mind if they had someone clear out the yard. My wife said in a phone call about 4 months after closing. Of course not. It's their house. Cool. And they might rent it for a weekend next month. Just to offset some of the taxes. That seemed reasonable. A weekend rental here and there. People did that. By month 6, my wife's mother casually mentioned they'd been reviewing some rental management companies. She used air quotes around it like she was joking. Just for the busy season, she said. July through September. We'd probably keep it for family use the rest of the time. But here's what I noticed, though I didn't say it. My in-laws had never invited us up. Not once in 6 months. We'd offered twice. Both times they had a reason. A booking. A repair. Some local event they were handling. The house I'd imagined us gathering in, with cousins and extended family, with my own parents if they wanted to visit, wasn't becoming a gathering place. It was becoming something else. Then my wife mentioned they were looking into doing the kitchen. With whose money? I asked. Theirs, she said. But she looked away when she said it. In December, I found the listings by accident. I was sitting in a client meeting, half listening to someone talk about quarterly projections, when my phone buzzed with a notification. An Airbnb review had been posted for a property I'd saved months ago. The house down the street from the Cannon Beach property we'd bought. I'd been looking at it casually, thinking maybe we could have a second place nearby. Except the review said, stunning oceanfront home, perfect location for a family getaway. The hosts were so friendly. And there, in the photo carousel, was our house. Not the one down the street. Ours. The gift. The kitchen had been remodeled. Professional stainless steel appliances. Marble countertops. The bedroom photo showed high-end linens, not the kind my in-laws would have bought. The listing description said it slept 8, had a hot tub on the back deck, included beach access, and was available for $450 a night. I kept scrolling. There were 93 reviews. 4.8 stars. I sat there in the Zoom call, the CFO of some healthcare startup talking about burn rates, and I felt something break open inside my chest. Not anger first. Confusion. The kind of confusion where your brain is trying to catch up to what your eyes are seeing. I texted my wife. Are your parents running an Airbnb out of the house we gave them? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. It took her 8 minutes to respond. We need to talk about this at home. I left the meeting. When I got there, it was 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. My wife was sitting at our kitchen table with her laptop open to a spreadsheet. An actual itemized financial spreadsheet. Revenue. Taxes. Home improvements. I wanted to tell you, she started. When? I wasn't yelling. I was doing something worse. I was very, very calm. When were you going to tell me? After the first year. They wanted to prove it was working first. Dad said if it flopped, he didn't want you to feel obligated to fix anything. It's not flopping, I said, looking at the numbers. 80% occupancy rate. Summer months were fully booked. Even in the off-season they were clearing $8,000–9,000 a month. She closed her eyes. They've been using the income to renovate. They redid the kitchen, the master bath. They installed that hot tub. That was... They said they were increasing the property value. For all of us. For all of us, I repeated. You would have said no, my wife said quietly. And that's when I understood the depth of what had happened. Not that they'd lied. That I'd been excluded from a decision about something I'd given them specifically, so I could be included in their life. How long have you known? Since last month. I found out by accident like you did. I asked them about it and they told me everything. And you didn't tell me. Because I was trying to figure out how to make you understand why they did it. I didn't confront them immediately. That was deliberate. I spent 2 weeks researching the business structure, LLC in my wife's father's name, the taxes. They were claiming depreciation on a rental property, which meant they were probably saving tens of thousands annually that they wouldn't have saved otherwise. The liability, if someone got injured on the property, who was liable? The reviews that were still coming in. 5-star reviews for the perfect anniversary getaway. I calculated that in 6 months, they'd made somewhere around $60,000 from a property I'd paid $480,000 for. That wasn't the issue though. The money wasn't the issue. The issue was the exclusion. The deliberate keeping of me outside. The choice they'd made, and that my wife had made, to not trust me with the truth. My wife kept trying to talk about it. They love you, she said one night. They're using your love to use me. That's not fair. What's not fair is that they could have just asked. Would you have said yes? I don't know. That's the whole point. We could have had a conversation. Instead, I bought them something and they built a business in secret. She didn't respond to that. I booked a flight to Portland for the following Saturday. Told my wife I was going. She asked if she should come with me. I said, no. I drove from Portland to Cannon Beach alone, along Highway 101, watching the coast get progressively more beautiful and more painful. It was a clear day. That made it worse somehow. The kind of day meant for better moments. They were both at the house when I arrived. This was late afternoon around 4 p.m. My father-in-law was working on the deck I'd never sat on, never used, never been invited to use. He looked genuinely happy to see me. This is a surprise. Everything okay? He wiped his hands on his jeans. I need to talk to you both, I said. Inside. My mother-in-law was in the kitchen, the remodeled kitchen with the marble counters that were beautiful and that I hated. She made tea. Some part of me appreciated that she still didn't understand that this wasn't a social visit. I sat at their dining table, walnut expensive, definitely purchased with Airbnb money, and I laid it out. I know about the rental. I've seen the listings. I know about the revenue. I know my wife found out last month and didn't tell me. I've been trying to figure out what to say that doesn't make me sound like the ungrateful asshole in this story, and I can't. So I'm not going to try. My father-in-law set down his tea. My mother-in-law stayed very still. You were given a gift. Not a loan. Not a down payment on something we'd owned together. A gift. And instead of just asking if you could use it differently than what we discussed, you created an entire business around it and told no one. You specifically told my wife not to tell me, which means you knew I wouldn't approve. We were going to tell you, my mother-in-law started. When? After a full year of profit? After you changed everything about the property? After you decided what it would be without asking the person who paid for it? My father-in-law leaned back in his chair. You're right, he said. You're absolutely right. We should have asked. That broke something in me that his resistance might have held together. An apology I wasn't expecting made everything worse somehow. I don't want your apology, I said. I want to understand why you didn't think of me as someone worth asking. Silence. Real silence. The kind that means someone's hearing something true. Because you would have said no, my father-in-law said finally. And we would have needed you to say yes. So instead you lied. We didn't lie. We just didn't tell the full truth. Same thing, I said. And you convinced my wife to keep it from me. You made her complicit in excluding me from something I'd given specifically to include myself. My mother-in-law was crying. Not performatively. She was trying not to, which somehow made it worse. I want the house listed for sale, I said. Within 30 days. I'll cover the cost of removing all the Airbnb infrastructure. I'll give you the first offer at what I originally paid for it. Or you can keep the Airbnb going and the house becomes mine. We go through the courts and I take it back. You can't do that, my father-in-law said. It's in our names. I'm aware, I said. And I'm also aware that I can afford very good lawyers and you cannot. That was cruel. It was also true and we all knew it. I'm going to stay in a hotel tonight. You have until tomorrow at 5 p.m. to tell me what you're choosing to do. I stood up. They didn't try to stop me. They chose to sell. It took longer than the 30 days. There was negotiation, there was lawyers' letters, there was a period where they apparently considered calling my bluff. But ultimately they listed it. A local real estate agent sold it in 42 days for $510,000. They made a profit, a decent one, on top of the money they'd made from the Airbnb. That detail will probably bother you as much as it bothered me. In the end they won. They got a house, turned it into a business, and still came out ahead. I didn't get back the version of that gift that existed in my head. What happened next was less dramatic and more brutal. My wife didn't speak to me for a week. Not hostile silence. Absent silence. She went to her parents' place in Cannon Beach. Said she needed time to think. Said I'd humiliated them. Said that maybe I'd proven something, that I could be ruthless, that I had power, but I'd broken something in the family that couldn't be fixed. They made a mistake, she said when she came home. A bad mistake. But they're your family. And you executed them for it. I didn't execute them. I took back something they were using dishonestly. You used money to make a point, she said. That's not who I thought you were. The thing is, she was right. I had used money to make a point. I'd had the ability to force a particular outcome, and I'd used it. Whether my outcome was more just than their original deception was a much more complicated question than I wanted it to be. We didn't separate, but something shifted. For months, there was a version of my wife who looked at me and saw someone she was trying to forgive for a righteous act. Which is worse than anger. Anger has motion. Forgiveness has weight. My in-laws didn't contact me for 8 months. My wife went to see them without me. They didn't come to our house. When she came home from those visits, she was quieter. I don't know what they said about me in those conversations, but I knew they weren't saying good things. Somewhere around month 9, my father-in-law showed up at my office. I was sitting at my desk when my assistant said someone was here to see me, and I almost didn't recognize him. He looked smaller, older, like something essential had been switched off. I'm not here to ask you anything, he said. I'm here to tell you something. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat down like he was very tired. We made a terrible decision, he said. Not a mistake. A decision. We knew what we were doing was wrong, and we did it anyway because we thought we could get away with it. We thought you'd be too embarrassed or too kind to actually push back. We gambled on your decency and you called the bet." He paused, looked out my window which shows the Portland skyline. Unremarkable view, but he stared at it like it held something. "I've been thinking about why we did it. The real reason. And it's not the money. We would have been fine without the money. It's because I couldn't bear the idea that you were rescuing us. That we needed rescuing. I'm 71 years old and I've never needed rescuing, and then my son-in-law, who I've spent years subtly resenting because he doesn't know boats and doesn't understand real work, he gives me a house. Like I'm someone who needs a gift. So you took it and made it a business," I said quietly. "We took it and made it something we did. Something we had control over. Something that proved we didn't need you." He stopped talking. I let him sit with that. Let myself sit with it. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Not because you took it back. Because I forced you to be the person who had to do that." I believed him. And that almost made it worse. After he left, I sat in my office for 2 hours and didn't move. I thought about the Airbnb listings. About the 93 reviews for a house I'd paid for that I'd never slept in. I thought about my wife standing in our kitchen saying, "They've turned it into their retirement plan." She had meant it as a defense. I heard it as something else entirely. The house sold to a family from Seattle who kept it as a vacation property. I heard this through my wife, who heard it from her mother. I never drove by to see what they did with it. I've never wanted to know. Last month my wife and I went to dinner with her parents for the first time in over a year. It was her mother's birthday. A low-stakes obligation that was actually high-stakes. We met at a restaurant on the coast. Not Cannon Beach, somewhere neutral. A place with dim lighting and enough ambient noise that silences don't feel like weapons. My father-in-law ordered fish. My mother-in-law got the halibut. My wife ordered something she's ordered before and I ordered something new. We talked about the weather, about a friend of theirs whose daughter was getting married, about whether the restaurant had gotten better since we'd last been there. At the end of the meal, my mother-in-law reached over and put her hand on mine. Just for a moment. Just long enough that I felt it as both an apology and an asking. "I'm glad you came," she said. And I was struck, sitting there in this nice restaurant with people I was slowly learning to be around again, that forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. It doesn't mean you forget that someone tried to use you. It means you remember it and you show up anyway. What I learned from the whole thing isn't something neat. It's not that I was right and they were wrong. It's not that money is power or that you should never be generous. It's not that family is precious and should be protected at all costs. Those are all incomplete truths shaped by what we need to believe. What I actually learned is that people will take what you give them and make it into something else. Sometimes something beautiful. Sometimes something that hurts you. Usually both. And your only choice is whether you keep showing up anyway, knowing that might happen again. My wife and I are still together. We're better in some ways. I think that fight taught us that we could fight and survive it. But there's a scar there. She knows I have a limit. She knows I'll use leverage if I need to. She knows who I am when I'm backed into a corner, and maybe she needed to know that. Maybe I needed to know it too. I never did get the family gathering place I'd imagined. The property where everyone felt safe and welcome, and like we belonged to each other without question. I got something more honest instead. I got a relationship where everyone knows what everyone else is capable of. Where we're choosing each other anyway. Where the gift, such as it is presence without illusion. If you've ever given something time, money, trust, yourself to someone you thought it would bind you closer to, and they used it to pull away from you instead, then you understand something about how the world actually works. It's not terrible. It's not that kindness is naive. It's that kindness is a risk, and sometimes the person you're kind to doesn't handle that risk the way you hoped. The other thing you learn is that you're stronger than you thought. That you can say no, actually no, and survive the fallout. That there are consequences to protecting yourself, and they're worth it. That's what stayed with me after everything settled. Not anger at what they did. Not pride in standing up for myself. But the quiet knowledge that I chose my integrity over comfort, and that I'd do it again. That's the gift I ended up giving myself.